A jealous Canadian man's obsession turned deadly when his girlfriend's secret connection to a trans lover pushed him over the edge. But when he vanished after failing to KLL, the question remained. Did he die in the wilderness? Or is he still out there, watching his victim from the shadows? It all began in the quiet city of Vancouver, where 29-year-old Tyler Moore lived an ordinary and predictable life. He worked long hours as a mechanic, spent weekends watching hockey, and rarely strayed from his routine. To those around him, Tyler seemed grounded and reliable, the kind of man who never caused trouble. His girlfriend, Emily Hart, a 27-year-old nurse, added warmth and balance to his life. They had been together for 3 years, shared an apartment, and even talked about marriage. But lately, things had started to feel different. Emily had grown distant, distracted by her phone, often smiling at messages she wouldn't explain. Tyler noticed her locking her screen more quickly and staying up late, pretending to scroll through work updates. At first, he convinced himself he was imagining things. Yet, as days passed, his unease grew heavier. One evening, while she showered, curiosity overcame guilt. He glanced at her phone and saw a name repeatedly lighting up her notifications, Aiden Ross. The name didn't ring a bell, but something about it unsettled him. He searched online, expecting to find a colleague or an old friend, but instead discovered a profile filled with artistic photos and motivational posts. The more he looked, the more questions flooded his mind. Who was this person? Why did Emily smile so differently when their name appeared? He tried to dismiss his suspicions, but the seed of doubt had already taken root. Over the next few days, Tyler found himself watching Emily more closely, analyzing every word and movement. What began as quiet curiosity slowly turned into an anxious obsession. Something inside him whispered that this Aiden person was more than a friend, and deep down, Tyler feared his perfect life was beginning to unravel. Tyler's curiosity quickly grew into something darker. The more he learned about Aiden Ross, the less he could think about anything else. Aiden's social media was public, filled with confident photos, smiling selfies, and captions about self-acceptance and strength. There were hundreds of comments praising his honesty and courage. Tyler read every post, searching for clues that connected Aiden to Emily. Soon, he found what he feared most: likes and subtle comments from her account on Aiden's photos. His heart sank, then hardened. He scrolled further and discovered that Aiden was a 31-year-old artist from Toronto, known locally for his motivational art and LGBTQ+ advocacy. As Tyler read more, he realized Aiden was transgender, a fact that both confused and infuriated him. He couldn't comprehend it, and instead twisted it into something personal. He convinced himself that Aiden was mocking him, stealing Emily's affection to prove some kind of point. Each night, Tyler stayed up late, staring at his phone screen in the dark, replaying Emily's recent behavior in his mind. Every unanswered text, every quiet moment, became evidence against her. He began to see patterns where none existed, imagining secret conversations and hidden plans. One night, unable to hold back any longer, he sent Aiden a direct message. It was short and sharp, demanding he stay away from Emily. Minutes later, he tried to check if it was read, only to discover he had been blocked. The screen flashed an error, and Tyler's pulse spiked. That simple act shattered his control. Being blocked didn't just silence him, it humiliated him. To Tyler, it felt like Aiden had dismissed him, stripped away his power, and laughed behind his back. From that moment, his jealousy turned into anger, and his obsession began to take over completely. The moment Tyler realized he had been blocked, something inside him snapped. It was no longer about curiosity or insecurity, it was about pride. He told himself that Aiden had crossed a line, that Emily had betrayed him, and that the world was laughing at his weakness. Every thought he had began to revolve around revenge. He stopped going out with friends, ignored calls from work, and spent hours scrolling through fake accounts he created just to monitor Aiden's activity. Through these profiles, he read comments from Aiden's followers and saw new photos of Emily's likes appearing again. To Tyler, each like felt like a stab in the chest. He started to convince himself that Aiden wasn't just someone Emily cared about, but someone who had deliberately set out to destroy him. He read old captions and twisted their meanings into personal insults. Even harmless phrases sounded like direct taunts. His world shrank until it only contained two people, Aiden and himself. The more he thought, the more the idea of confrontation grew in his mind. He began searching for Aiden's address, browsing directories, and even contacting people who might know him. When he found a location listed on one of Aiden's art event flyers in Toronto, the decision came easily. He told himself it wasn't about violence, only closure. But the bag he packed said otherwise. Inside it were gloves, rope, and a hammer he had once used at work. He justified every move, convincing himself he was standing up for his dignity. He rented a car, turned off his phone's GPS, and left Vancouver before sunrise. As he drove east, the anger inside him began to harden into purpose. The man who left that morning was no longer just jealous. He was dangerous. The drive from Vancouver to Toronto stretched endlessly before Tyler, a blur of highways, motels, and static-filled radio stations. Each passing town felt meaningless as his mind sank deeper into obsession. The trip took days, but he barely slept or ate. He stopped only for gas and coffee, his eyes red from exhaustion and rage. The landscape outside the window changed from coastal mountains to flat prairies, but inside the car, the same thoughts played on repeat. Emily's laughter, Aiden's face, and the mocking silence of being blocked. The isolation of the road fed his anger. He imagined Aiden and Emily together, smiling, whispering, and plotting against him. Every mile made the fantasy more vivid, more unbearable. To distract himself, Tyler listened to Aiden's old podcast episodes he had downloaded before leaving. They were about self-acceptance and courage, but in Tyler's twisted state, every word felt like a direct challenge. He paused and rewound sections, convincing himself Aiden was referring to him. He gripped the steering wheel tighter with every repetition. In his trunk sat the duffel bag he'd packed in a fog of fury, duct tape, gloves, and the heavy hammer. He told himself it was just protection, but deep down, he knew what he planned to do. When he finally crossed into Ontario, snow began to fall, soft and steady, coating the windshield like a curtain between him and reason. He checked into a cheap motel outside Toronto, staring at himself in the bathroom mirror. His reflection looked hollow, almost unrecognizable. The quiet man from Vancouver was gone, replaced by someone consumed by anger and humiliation. As night fell, Tyler opened his map, circled Aiden's neighborhood, and whispered to himself that by tomorrow, everything would finally be over. Aiden Ross lived in a modest apartment on a quiet Toronto street, filled with the soft light of afternoon sun and the hum of city life outside. His home reflected who he was, peaceful, colorful, and filled with meaning. Canvases leaned against the walls, brushes soaked in jars of paint, and notes of unfinished projects scattered across his table. Online, Aiden was admired for his honesty and resilience, often speaking about self-love and healing. But while his followers saw strength, they didn't see the silent fear that sometimes lingered from the hate messages he received. Across the street, Tyler Moore sat in his rented car, watching from behind tinted windows. He had been there for hours, engine off, hands gripping the steering wheel. He studied every movement, the way Aiden greeted neighbors, the times he came and went, the faces that visited. Each observation fed his delusion that Aiden had stolen Emily's heart. Tyler began writing notes, mapping patterns, and marking times on scraps of paper. At night, he parked on the next block, sleeping in his car, waking with every sound. He had become a shadow, unseen yet entirely consumed by what he watched. Back in Vancouver, Emily had begun to sense something terrible. She noticed Tyler's messages had stopped, his location was disabled, and his tone in earlier texts had grown colder. Searching his laptop, she found open tabs with Aiden's name and routes to Toronto. Panic spread through her chest. Realizing he might do something violent, she contacted the Toronto police anonymously, explaining her fears. The officer on the other end listened, but said without evidence, there wasn't much they could do. Meanwhile, Tyler was still outside Aiden's apartment, convinced that no one, not even fate, could stop what he was about to do next. The anonymous call Emily made reached the Toronto police early that morning. The officer logged it under possible threat, noting that the suspect was traveling from Vancouver and might be targeting someone named Aiden Ross. But with no confirmed address or proof of intent, the report went no further. Meanwhile, Tyler was already inside Aiden's apartment building, his plans set in motion. He had waited near the entrance until a tenant arrived, pretending to search for keys, and slipped in behind them unnoticed. The stairwell smelled faintly of paint and dust. Tyler crouched on the second floor, gripping the hammer inside his jacket pocket, heart pounding so hard it echoed in his ears. Hours passed. Every creak of the floorboards made him flinch. He replayed all the moments that had brought him there: Emily's distance, Aiden's posts, the humiliation of being blocked. In his mind, this was justice. He imagined confronting Aiden, demanding answers, forcing him to feel the same pain. When the door at the end of the hall finally opened, Tyler tensed. Aiden stepped out, headphones in, keys jingling. The moment should have been simple: a strike, an ending. But before Tyler could move, a neighbor's door suddenly swung open. A woman carrying groceries gasped at the sight of him. Startled, Tyler ducked his head and rushed down the stairs, abandoning his plan. Outside, the cold night air hit his face, and panic set in. He realized how close he had come, yet how unprepared he truly was. He tossed the hammer into a dumpster and walked aimlessly through the empty streets, shaking, his mind flickering between rage and confusion. For the first time, doubt crept in, but by then, it was already too late to turn back. The next morning, Tyler woke before sunrise in his motel room, his clothes still damp from the night before. The failed attempt haunted him. He replayed every second: the neighbor's door opening, the shock on her face, and the fear that had sent him running. But fear soon turned into determination. He told himself he couldn't leave things unfinished. He cleaned himself up, shaved, and dressed in dark clothes. This time, he needed a plan that would get him close without suspicion. At a convenience store, he bought a cheap baseball cap, a hoodie, and a roll of tape to cover the license plate on his rented car. When he returned to Aiden's building, he noticed delivery drivers coming and going. The idea formed quickly: he would pretend to be one of them. He found an empty cardboard box in a dumpster, scribbled a fake shipping label, and carried it confidently toward the entrance. The door opened when a tenant buzzed someone in, and he slipped inside unnoticed. On the third floor, he knocked on Aiden's door, holding the box under one arm. After a moment, footsteps approached. The lock clicked, and Aiden opened the door slightly, confusion crossing his face. Tyler's breath caught. For the first time, he saw the person who had consumed his thoughts: calm, composed, and nothing like the villain he had imagined. For a fleeting second, he hesitated, a flicker of guilt rising in his chest. But when Aiden recognized him from social media, fear flashed in his eyes. He tried to close the door. Instinct took over. Tyler lunged forward, pushing the door with his shoulder, but Aiden slammed it shut just in time. The sound echoed down the hallway. Moments later, distant sirens began to wail, and Tyler fled once again. Aiden called the police the moment he heard Tyler's footsteps fade down the hall. His hands trembled as he described the man who had tried to force his way inside: his height, build, and the fury in his eyes. Officers arrived within minutes, taking photos, dusting for prints, and securing the hallway. The building's security camera showed only a blurry image of Tyler leaving in a hurry, but it was enough to confirm that the man matched the description from Emily's earlier anonymous call. Police connected the two reports and issued an alert across the city. Tyler Moore was now officially a wanted suspect. By that time, he had already abandoned his car in a parking lot on the outskirts of Toronto, removing anything that could trace back to him. He used cash for everything, checked into a cheap motel under a false name, and pulled the curtains tight to block the outside world. For 2 days, he barely slept. His mind was a storm of regret, anger, and paranoia. The television in the room played muted news reports about the incident, and every time he saw Aiden's name mentioned, he turned the volume lower. He knew the police were searching, but instead of fear, he felt emptiness. The mission that once seemed righteous now felt hollow. He thought about Emily, about the life he had thrown away, and about the face of the person he had nearly hurt. Still, shame kept him from going home. He convinced himself it was too late to fix anything. On the second night, he left the motel quietly, taking only a small backpack and a prepaid phone. Surveillance cameras later captured him walking toward the highway, disappearing into the freezing Ontario night without looking back. Days later, Tyler's disappearance became breaking news. Police found his abandoned car in a parking lot near a bus terminal, its doors unlocked and the keys left inside. In the trunk, they discovered the duffel bag containing gloves, duct tape, and a work hammer, a grim sign of his original intentions. The discovery confirmed what Emily already feared. She cooperated with investigators, revealing everything she knew: his growing obsession, his late-night stalking, and his sudden trip east. Her voice trembled as she told them she had tried to warn them before it was too late. The media quickly picked up the story, labeling Tyler as the jealous mechanic. Across the country, the case sparked debate about online relationships, hate-driven crimes, and the dangers of unchecked obsession. Meanwhile, Aiden chose to step forward publicly, not as a victim, but as a voice for others who had faced similar threats. He gave interviews, shared his experience, and turned his fear into advocacy. His followers grew rapidly, united by empathy and outrage. But despite the national attention, Tyler's trail went cold. Search teams combed the woods and frozen lakes north of Ontario, guided by tips from motorists who thought they had seen him hitchhiking. Eventually, near a remote lake surrounded by pine trees, they found a few of his belongings: his jacket, wallet, and phone, all half buried in the snow. No footprints led away from the site. After weeks of searching, authorities declared him missing, presumed dead, likely having succumbed to the elements. Yet, for many, the ending didn't feel complete. There was no body, no final proof. Emily tried to move on, haunted by guilt, while Aiden struggled with the weight of survival. Somewhere in the stillness of the Canadian wilderness, Tyler's silence became its own mystery. Months passed, and the chaos surrounding Tyler Moore's disappearance slowly began to fade. News outlets shifted their attention to newer stories, but for those directly involved, the shadows of what had happened never truly lifted. Aiden tried to rebuild his life, though the memory of that day lingered like a scar. He changed apartments, tightened his security, and deleted all personal information from his public pages. For a while, peace seemed possible, but then strange activity began to appear on his social media accounts. A new follower with no profile picture began liking his oldest photos, ones that hadn't been touched in years. At first, Aiden dismissed it as a bot, but then came the comments: vague, cryptic phrases that felt personal, written in the same tone Tyler once used. The police traced the account's signal to a public Wi-Fi network near the lake where Tyler's belongings had been found. It wasn't proof that he was alive, but it reopened every fear Aiden had worked so hard to bury. The investigation restarted quietly, though no physical trace ever emerged. Some believed Tyler had faked his death, disappearing into the wilderness to live off the grid. Others thought someone else had taken over his digital identity, using it to torment Aiden from afar. Emily, now living in another city, refused to speak publicly about the case again. She spent her nights wondering if the man she once loved had truly died, or if he was still out there, watching. As winter returned to Canada, snow once again covered the lake where Tyler's trail had ended. Beneath the stillness, unanswered questions lingered. Was it guilt that drove him into hiding, or vengeance that kept him alive? No one ever found out, and perhaps no one ever will.